Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen of the media and those joining us virtually, good morning. Thanks for joining us at the Planning Institute of Jamaica's quarterly press briefing. Today, the Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, will provide preliminary estimates on the performance of the economy for the January to March 2022 period. Dr. Henry is supported by Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, Economic Planning and Research Division. At the end of the presentation, we will take your questions and Gwyneth will advise you as to how to do this. Dr. Henry, the virtual floor is yours.
Good morning, members of the media and colleagues who are here to attend the quarterly PIOJ press briefing. Welcome. We are going to be conducting the meeting in the following way. We will have presentations from persons in the room, and at the end, you'll be able to ask your questions by placing it in the chat, raising your hand, and your mic will be opened. Thanks again, and over back to our chairperson, Mrs. Blake Hall.
Dr. Henry, you may go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide the details on economic performance, let me remind you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter. This is based on early information available from the major data providers. This release of the preliminary estimate is consistent with trends in all modern economies globally, where it is a common practice to release a first, second, and even a third preliminary estimate before the final official figures are released. The PIOJ releases a preliminary growth estimate approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed. Note, however, that the targeted timeline for the press briefing is sometimes impacted by challenges in the data collection process. Statin releases the official GDP figures at the end of the third month following the end of the quarter. The release of the preliminary outturn information is used by various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, as well as the government, to inform critical planning and policy-related decisions. I would also like to reiterate that trends have shown that the gap between our initial estimate and the subsequent estimate produced by Statin is more likely to be larger in times of extraordinary shocks, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, the variation between PIOJ's estimate and Statin's subsequent estimate is likely to be outside the usual band. Today, we're reporting that real gross domestic product, GDP, for the Jamaican economy grew by an estimated 6% in the January to March 2022 quarter, compared with the corresponding quarter of 2021. This outturn represented the fourth consecutive quarter of growth and reflected a continuation of the recovery trend following contractions in the corresponding quarter as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated public health and social measures implemented to manage its spread. The outturn for January to March 2022 largely reflected the impact of, one, increased external demand, especially for Jamaica's tourism product. This was facilitated by a relaxation of public health and social measures, particularly travel restrictions. This development was reflected in the positive performances for the transport, hotels and restaurants, and other services industries. And two, increased domestic demand associated with higher levels of employment and operational hours as more industries gradually returned to normalcy. This was particularly evident in the performance of the agriculture and wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery industries. Further growth in the economy was tempered by a relatively strong contraction in the mining and quarrying industry due to the closure of the Jamalco alumina plant in August 2021, caused by a fire at that facility, and a spike in COVID-19 cases globally and locally in January 2022, related to the Omicron variant, which tempered the pace of increase in demand and worsened the supply chain disruptions. Real sector developments in the goods producing industry. Output of the goods producing industry declined by an estimated 2.1% due to contractions in the mining and quarrying and manufacturing industries. This performance largely reflected the impact of decreased capacity utilization in both industries. These contractions outweighed improvements recorded for agriculture and construction industries. Agriculture. Output of the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry grew by an estimated 8.6%. The performance of the industry reflected the impact of favorable weather conditions, an increase in hectares reaped, and increased demand associated with the further relaxation of the public health and social measures. Additionally, government support through initiatives aimed at boosting production and productivity also contributed positively to output per hectare. The other agricultural crops group was estimated to have grown by 10.4%, reflecting increased production in all 9 crop groups as a result of a rise in hectare reaped in all crop groups. The most significant increases were recorded for cereals, up 23.7%, condiments, up 20.2%, fruits, up 20%, plantains, up 19.8%, and potatoes, up 10.9%. Traditional export crops grew by an estimated 7.8%, reflecting higher output for bananas, up 10.1%, and cocoa, up 57%. Sugarcane production declined by 5.4%, reflecting factory downtime, largely associated with mechanical issues at the Frome sugar factory. Animal farming was estimated to have grown by 5.2%, mainly reflecting the combined effect of increased production of broiler meat, up 6.2%, and eggs, up 8.1%. Lower output was recorded for post-harvest activities due to lower coffee production. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for mining and quarrying contracted by 64.3% due to lower output of both alumina and crude bauxite. Alumina production fell by 74.3%, mainly as a result of no production at the Jamalco alumina plant, which closed in August 2021 due to a fire at the facility. Consequently, the alumina capacity utilization rate was 11.4%, down 32.8 percentage points compared with the corresponding quarter of 2021. Crude bauxite production declined by 2.9%, resulting from lower demand. The average bauxite capacity utilization rate fell by 1.4 percentage points to 48.6%. Manufacturing. Real value added for the manufacturing industry was estimated to have contracted by 0.7% due to a decrease in the other manufacturing sub-industry, which outweighed an increase in the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry. In the other manufacturing category, lower output stemmed largely from decreases in the petroleum products and non-metallic mineral categories. Reductions were recorded for liquid petroleum gas, LPG, down 71.9%, asphalt down 42.9%, and gasoline down 32.9%. The Petrojam refinery was not in operation for 9 days during the quarter. The non-metallic minerals category also declined due to cement production down 7.1% and clinker down 4.4%. For the food processing component, growth was driven by higher production for poultry meat, up 6.6%, as well as increases in the beverages and tobacco component, specifically rum and alcohol up 7.2% and carbonated beverages up 17.9%. The sub-industry benefited from increased demand associated with growth in the hotels and restaurants industry. Further growth was stymied by declines recorded for edible oils, down 16.7%, edible fats, down 21.8%, sugar, down 7.5%, and molasses, down 8.3%. Construction. Real value added for construction grew by 1.1%, reflecting growth in both the other construction and building construction components. The growth in the building construction component was driven by a 1.5% increase in the value of mortgages disbursed by the NHT to $8.1 billion. Real sales of construction inputs grew, with wholesale of construction materials, hardware, and plumbing up 13.4%, and retail sale of paint and glass up 2.9%. The increase in the other construction component was due to higher capital expenditure on civil engineering activities, reflecting Jamaica Public Service Company up 20.9% to $1.4 billion, National Works Agency, NWA, which disbursed $6.6 billion, an increase of 133.1%. Disbursement facilitated work on the Yallas to Harborview leg of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, SCHIP. NROC, which disbursed $444.8 million, was up 61.3% to facilitate works on the Part A of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, SCHIP, that is the Maypen in Clarendon to Williams Field in Manchester component. Developments in the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have grown by 8.9%, largely reflecting growth in all industries, with the exception of producers of government services, which remained flat. The improved performance resulted from the continuation of the recovery process associated with the removal of the public health and social measures. These measures were implemented globally and locally to manage the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in the areas of air and land transportation, tourist accommodation, and entertainment services. Electricity and water supply. The electricity and water supply industry recorded growth of 1.4% in real value added, reflecting increases in both electricity and water consumption. Electricity consumption increased by 1.7%, reflecting higher consumption for 4 of 6 categories, namely general service, that's small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere kVA, which was up 4.2%, power service, that's large businesses using more than 25 kVA but less than 500 kVA, was up 2.4%, and large power, that's businesses using more than 500 kVA, was up 9.1%, and largest power, that's single locations that have minimum peak demand of 2000 kVA, was up 9.7%. These were sufficient to outweigh declines recorded for residential, down 3.3%, and street lighting and traffic signals, down 14.9%. When disaggregated by parish, the largest increases were recorded for Trelawney, up 19.9%, Westmoreland, up 14.8%, and St. Anne, up 11.3%. These increases were largely attributed to an increase in tourism activities within these parishes. The largest declines were recorded for Clarendon, down 15.8%, St. Elizabeth, down 5.3%, and St. Thomas, down 3.9%. The decline in Clarendon may be partly attributed to no production at the Jamalco alumina plant compared with being operational during the January to March 2021 period. Water consumption increased by 0.2% due to higher consumption in the Western Division, up 9.3%, that outweighed lower consumption in the Eastern Division of 4%. Transportation, storage, and communication. Real value added for transport, storage, and communication grew by 8.1% due to an estimated increase in the transport and storage component, combined with an estimated increase in the communication component. The growth in the transport and storage component reflected the combined effect of significant growth in air transport, largely reflecting increased passenger movements, up 187.2%, due to arrivals, up 199.2%, and departures, up 171.9%. This reflected the gradual reopening of the economy following the further relaxation of COVID-19 containment measures. However, there was an estimated decline in cargo handled at both the Port of Kingston, down 5.5%, and outports, down 22.1%. The decline in the outports partly reflect the fall in the export of alumina and bauxite. Finance and insurance services. Real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.5%. This performance was influenced by increased profitability at deposit-taking institutions associated with a higher level of economic activities. Wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, WR trim. Real value added for the WR trim industry was estimated to have increased by 9.5%, reflecting the impact of higher demand resulting from an increase in the employed labor force by 57,800 persons, a relaxation of measures associated with the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, which facilitated increased operational hours, and a relatively strong increase in both the Consumer Confidence Index, up 30.1%, and the Business Confidence Index, up 13.8%. There was a 12.6% increase in total real gross sales. Higher sales were recorded for 7 of the 8 categories, including textiles, clothing, shoes and jewelry, up 37.4%, minerals, fuels, lubricants and petroleum products, up 28.1%, and retail sales of goods and services in specialized and non-specialized stores, up 17.7%. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry increased by an estimated 105.7%. The industry continues to benefit from increased travel in light of the relaxation of previously implemented COVID-19 containment measures. Preliminary data revealed that foreign national arrivals increased by 230.1% to 475,805 visitors, and cruise passenger arrivals was 99,798 relative to none in the corresponding quarter. Based on data received for January to February 2022, total visitor expenditure increased to US $485.6 million relative to US $169.2 million in the corresponding period. For the employment update, based on the labor force survey undertaken by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Statin, for the month of January 2022, the unemployment rate was 6.2%, the lowest rate ever recorded. This was 2.6 percentage points below the rate recorded for January 2021. The number of persons employed increased by 57,800 to 1,257,100 persons relative to January 2021. There was an increase in the labor force by 24,800 persons to 1,340,600 persons. The continued improvement in the labor market is associated with growth in the real sector and the relaxation of public health and social measures. As at January 2022, the labor force was 32,300 persons below January 2020, which represented a pre-pandemic high. And this was representing a significant improvement from the 89,600 reduction initially recorded at the early stages of the COVID-19 impact, which was July 2020. Similarly, the employed labor force as at January 2022 was 15,600 persons below the pre-pandemic level. But this represents a significant improvement from the initial 151,100 jobs lost at the start of the impact, which was in July 2020. Based on current trends, the PIOJ maintains its forecast for a full recovery in the employed labor force during fiscal year 2022-23. For GDP performance for fiscal year 2021-22, for fiscal year 2021-22, real GDP growth was projected to fall within the range of 7% to 9%. Based on the preliminary outturn for January to March 2022, the fiscal year 2021-22 is estimated to have grown by 8.1%, supported by improvement and improved performances in all industries, except mining and quarrying, which contracted by an estimated 39.8%, due mainly to the closure of the Jamalco alumina plant. The heavier weighted services industry was estimated to have grown by 9.6%, and the goods producing industry by 3%. The industries which recorded the strongest growth during the fiscal year were hotels and restaurants, up 125%, other services up 14.5%, agriculture up 11.2%, wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery and equipment up 10.9%, and transport, storage and communication up 10.1%. For the short-term economic outlook, April to June 2022 and fiscal year 2022-23. For April to June 2022, growth prospects for the economy are generally positive. It is projected that the economy will grow within the range of 2% to 4% relative to April to June 2021, based on the continuation of the recovery process relative to the low output levels recorded in the corresponding period of 2021. This projection is supported by the further relaxation of COVID-19 containment measures relative to 2021, where restrictions were still in effect for social gathering, as well as an increase in domestic demand spurred by higher levels of employment. Growth during this period is expected to be driven by the hotels and restaurants, other services, and transport, storage, and communications industries, reflecting the upturn in tourism and entertainment activities. Preliminary data for the April to June 2022 quarter has indicated some positive movements which support this projection. Preliminary airport arrivals for April 2022 totaled 227,259 persons, an increase of 174.8% compared with April 2021. Electricity consumption for April 2022 grew by 4.1% relative to April 2021. The projection for the fiscal year 2022-23 is for growth within the range of 2% to 5%. This revised forecast, down from the previous range of 3% to 6%, takes into consideration the high degree of uncertainty surrounding unfolding global developments, including the impact of geopolitical developments associated with the Russia-Ukraine war. This has led to an intensification of the supply chain challenges which initially emerged at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a slowing in the pace of global economic recovery. The war in Ukraine has therefore compounded economic challenges, as many countries are still in the process of fully recovering from the economic and social onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are upside potential and downside risks to this forecast. However, given the high level of uncertainty, the risks are generally to the downside. The main downside risks to the forecast presented include: one, the potential for the emergence of new and more virulent strains of COVID-19, coupled with the relatively low rate of vaccination in the country. This increases the uncertainty with regard to normalization and may lead to the reimposition of public health and social measures. Two, slower than expected growth in external demand due to weaker than projected growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners. This has already materialized due to the war in Ukraine and the associated increases in commodity prices, faster than initially projected increase in interest rates, and the downward revision to global growth. The war is expected to delay the recovery process due to its negative impact manifested through higher commodity prices, particularly crude oil and grains, for which Russia and Ukraine are significant market players. Russia also plays an integral role in the global production of fertilizers. The resultant adverse impact on the cost of living for households and the cost of production for firms is expected to have a dampening effect on economic activity. The pace of growth may slow even further if war lasts for an extended period. And 3, global supply chain challenges associated with COVID-19 induced factory closures and labor shortages that disrupt the production process. And this is further compounded by the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. As such, against the background of the continued threat of COVID-19, global supply chain disruptions, the Russia-Ukraine war and its associated impact on commodity prices, and monetary tightening in several countries to address inflation, the IMF has revised downwards its global growth projection for 2022 by 0.8 percentage point to 3.6%. Other risks to the forecast are weather-related shocks, particularly on agriculture and electricity and water industries, increased factory downtime associated with aged production plants, and slower than initially expected resumption of production at the Jamalco refinery. Current projections are that 50% of Jamalco's capacity will be available at the end of June 2022 and 100% of capacity available by the end of September 2022. There is potential upside to the growth projections, and these are higher than expected external demand for Jamaica's goods and services, specifically tourism, due to, among other things, a faster than expected growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners, faster than expected refurbishing and upgrading of production plants, especially in the mining and quarrying and manufacturing industries, increased domestic demand associated with stronger domestic linkages as local firms capitalize on opportunities to satisfy local and global demand that were previously fulfilled by the global supply chain. Additionally, a more robust increase in employment levels could lead to higher than expected strengthening of domestic demand. Regarding our Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan, the PIOJ is currently in the process of completing documentation for the preparation of the medium-term framework, which is 2021 to 2024. And this incorporates the strategic planning and thematic reporting on performance in the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica. That is, the progress towards achieving established targets. As such, a comprehensive update on Vision 2030 Jamaica will be provided in the next quarterly press briefing. Speaking now to the impact of recent labor disputes on economic activities. Recently, there were disruptions in economic activities as a result of industrial actions by workers operating in water and air transport services. To date, we have received preliminary data on the impact on the output of the water supply sub-industry. The strike by NWC workers on May 10 and 11 was estimated by the National Water Commission, NWC, to have led to losses as follows. Revenue was down $240 million. Water production was down 1,297.4 megaliters, and water consumption was down 454.3 megaliters. The downturn in water consumption during the period of industrial action was equivalent to 2.1% of total water consumption during the April to June 2022 quarter. At this stage, we are still awaiting data on the impact on the air transport and tourism activities to complete the assessment on overall GDP as requested by the Prime Minister. A more comprehensive update will therefore be provided at a later date. So in conclusion, the preliminary data presented on economic performance for the January to March 2022 quarter indicate that the economy continues to grow despite the challenges of managing the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as those emerging from the Russia-Ukraine war. The growth recorded for fiscal year 2021-22 is in line with previous projections and supports the expectation for a return to pre-pandemic output levels by fiscal year 2023-24. With respect to the labor market, it is expected that pre-pandemic employment levels will be regained in the current fiscal year 2022-23. For the current fiscal year 22-23, the economy is anticipated to grow within the range of 2% to 5%. Growth will be supported by the continued economic recovery, particularly in the services industry, which was more negatively impacted by the pandemic. The expected reopening of the Jamalco alumina plant will also serve to boost output in the mining and quarrying industry and cauterize the drag on growth in the goods producing industry. The relatively wider forecast range is a reflection of the higher degree of uncertainties associated with the challenges. So, for example, if the war in Ukraine extends beyond a protracted period or extends for a protracted period, as in for the remainder of the fiscal year, it is assumed that the outturn will fall closer to the bottom end of this range. Despite the several challenges that abound, we remain cautiously optimistic as we continue to closely monitor and assess these developments. Any additional challenges in the labor market could serve to negate some of the recent positive gains realized during this recovery period. It is against this background that I encourage both the government and private sector employers, as well as the unions representing workers in both the public and private sectors, to approach labor disputes in a manner that will be rewarding to both workers and employers and not cause harm to the development process. In closing, I want to acknowledge and thank the very dedicated team here at the PIOJ. And I encourage us to remain and maintain our collaborative effort and to remain disciplined and responsible as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. May God continue to bless Jamaica land we love. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. So Dr. Henry has just presented on preliminary estimates, short-term prospects, and also preliminary estimates of labor disputes. The floor is now open for your question. You may use the raise hand feature or chat, after which you will be identified. Once you are identified, please give your name and organization that you are representing. You may go ahead and place your questions now. Are there any questions? Gwyneth, do you have any questions? Yes, I see one coming in. It's from Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News. The Bank of Jamaica has been hiking interest rates since last year. Has there been any noticeable impact from this on the Jamaica's growth projection?
All right, thank you very much for the question, Siobhan. So the answer is no. Though the recovery momentum that we are seeing as industries return to capacity, and as they are building capacity, particularly as we are seeing in the tourism and entertainment and other services industries, as we are seeing that recovery process, that has been, the momentum there has been very strong. And so as interest rates have increased, we haven't seen a noticeable drag in terms of that way on growth. What we've explained you're seeing is maybe in terms of in mining and quarrying, the fire at Jamalco, some other issues that would affect. And we are seeing overall the supply chain challenges and overall global environment and some of the issues dampening growth in the global environment. But we haven't seen any direct impact thus far from the interest rate increases because of the strength of the recovery process thus far.
Thanks, Dr. Henry. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Javon Keys, Television Jamaica. My question is a follow-up almost to that. I mean, more and more banks will be increasing their own internal interest rates, and we're seeing the contraction because of the slowdown in throughput of goods from overseas territories because of the shipping constraints. Is the PIOJ concerned about a possible recession for Jamaica? You hear the World Bank hinting that it's hard to avoid one. BOJ is however saying that they're not seeing signs of that. But what is the PIOJ's view on whether or not we could see a recession?
So thank you for that, Javon. We are not seeing at this point, right, the signs. The risks we outline are evident. And so you are in an environment of risk and uncertainty. And we've highlighted those as potential in terms of, and you'll be speaking now to the downside issues. But we are not seeing, as you speak, to recession, no. So we would share the view of the IMF, of the BOJ, that at this point we are not seeing. The risks are evident, but we are not seeing in terms of projections now for recession. So you are still projected to grow. And for this fiscal year, the global growth, and you're hearing our projection. So that's a projection at this point, that we are not seeing recession now, but the risks are certainly in the environment. James, anything you want to add? That's it.
Thanks for your response, Dr. Henry. Any other questions? No.
But if there are no other questions, I do have another one, and this is regarding the weighting of various categories. So we hear of the services sector continuously growing, and leading that growth is the hotel and restaurants. Wanted to find out the weighting. Is the hotel and restaurant segment weighted heavier than the others, or is the weighting the same across the board?
James, thank you for that, Javon.
It's not the same across the board. For hotel and restaurants, it's approximately 9% of GDP, somewhere between 8 and 9% of overall GDP. And it's a component of services, which is just above 70% of GDP. The goods producing industry would account for about 38, 39%.
Thanks, Mr. Stewart. Gwyneth, do you have any other questions for the floor?
Let me add, Marcia, so when I spoke to the impact on water from the NWC strike, I said that the downturn in water consumption during the period of industrial action was equivalent to 2.1% of total water consumption during the April to June 22 quarter, but it really should be April to June 2021. Right, because we don't have the 2022, as you can imagine, yet, because we are just at the end of May, but we are looking at that equivalence based on the last set of numbers we have in terms of the corresponding quarter last year. So that should be 2.1% of the equivalent of the April to June 2021 quarter, just to make that correction. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are no other questions, thanks for joining us and thanks for participating. Today's presentation will be uploaded to our website and social media pages of the PIOJ and Vision 2030 Jamaica. The links are displayed on the screen. Join us again in August when we will present on the performance of the April to May 2022 period. Have a good day and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.